So, John, I thought for today we switch it up a little bit, and the next two episodes we do something more of a freestyling kind of topic. So for episode 10, which is today's episode, I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak on something that you're passionate about, to talk about something that you feel should be communicated to the design community, or anything along those lines. I will do the same thing next week. We'll keep mine a surprise, but for today, I'm giving you the floor, and feel free to talk about what you want.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Since I promised it, I feel like I should go ahead and talk about the process that I use to design with. I've like refined and came up with different processes for different types of projects, and and lean process, and now these days I've been using another lean process that I call my 12-step process. So let's just dive right in.
Awesome.
My first step: grasp the vision and design and collect requirements. I see so many people just like jump right into projects without actually fully understanding what the vision is. And it really it's a hindrance to everybody, a hindrance to themselves, because like it's easy to get emotional and go down a track for something that you think is, looks cool or feels cool for whatever reason. But if it's not actually doing the objective of what it's, intended to do, then like ultimately you're going to run into problems down that line, unless you're in like some super like, flexible thing where you're like bending the design to be the, the vision or whatnot. And that's like highly unusual, and doesn't typically work out so well either way. But anyway, yeah, always grasp the vision, work, set those early meetings with every single stakeholder, and to make sure that you're all on page and you know what this is all about. And I also like to write down those steps and write down those the things in the mission on my sketch file when I'm designing, so that I always have that in front of me, and I make sure every single thing that I put on my interface relates to a mission that we have.
I love it.
So number 2, take time to think. This is something that I failed to do a lot of times early on in my career. I just dive right in. It's like boom, 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 bam. I never really took that time to just sit back, lay on my back on the couch or on my hammock, which is usually where I do this. I literally like have my hammock time for every single project I have. I'll just lay on a hammock and truly think about the problem. Think about if what we're trying to solve makes sense. Think about, my early directions or the visions I'm starting to form in my head about what I want to do makes sense. Just really think about the problem and what we're trying to solve from a very holistic viewpoint. Just truly try to put yourself, I call it my like character development, kind of like what an actor would do to like prepare for like a character role, where you try to put yourself in the mindset of the character. I get into my Denzel Washington, like, who is the user here? Yeah. I am the user. I am now you.
Side note, there's actually a really cool documentary about Jim Carrey coming to Netflix about, him getting into character.
Oh,
so
wow.
We'll talk about that later, but yeah, cool.
Yeah. So you got to do that, take time to think and put yourself in that mind state. And the other thing attached to this step is to perform the competitive analysis. Basically look at everyone else who is doing it well and who's just leading for whatever reason, because oftentimes, people who are leading a particular market aren't necessarily doing it in a great user experience type of way. And just look at their pros and cons. What I typically do for everything is I take about I pick apart like 4 to 5 different people doing, interfaces, projects doing what I'm doing. And I literally look into like the reviews, see what people hate, check their Twitter. I used to use this tool all the time called Radian 6, where it just scans everything across different social networks and, across the internet in an aggregated way. And, gave me just pretty much a summary of what people felt about things. And so that I can play to the strengths of what they're great at, and also play to their weaknesses, and and make sure I design something that's better than what they've done. Build upon something that's great, and by just filling in the holes of everything that has held them back. Number 3, journey map. And I put, in any other research insight method, it doesn't always have to be journey mapping. It could be a ton of other ways of, analyzing, but basically what users want. But journey mapping is my favorite method, in which you plot out pretty much the path in which your users will take to achieve their objectives. And it's really fun. You can do this from different personas and different mind states, but it's really great to see that step, so you can, know where they might be hung up, and most importantly, include their emotions for every stage of that way, like what they're feeling as they're like on the sign-in screen, what thoughts they could possibly be having, what frustration points they might have, so that you can like really build something that's in tune with like a happy mind state, and make sure that you ensure like user satisfaction along the process of every single thing on your, and what you're designing. Number 4 is to map out the navigation/content model. And that's pretty much just like, just making sure you have your project well organized. This is something that a lot of projects fail at. I was talking to a bunch of people recently about my aggravation with the Amazon Alexa app.
Yeah.
And even in Google Home app, sometimes, just Internet of Things apps in general tend to be a bit of a navigation mess. It's really hard to figure out what's going on. It's like skills on one page and devices on one page and home control and like all this stuff that sounds like the same thing. And it's just like all over the place. Make sure you really think out how people, navigate your experience and, how each, the content flows. And I'll go into that more into detail on a future podcast. Number 5 is to conceptualize interactions and review patterns, which pretty much, the bread and butter of an interaction designer, pretty much thinking of how you want the flow to go. Interaction design is pretty much like, how it feels as you're using it. And review all patterns to make sure you're like somewhat pattern, compliant with like what people expect. If you're like building something on iOS and Android, make sure you design it according to the patterns of Android when you do the Android version, not try to force people into your pattern that you've acquired if you're a primary iOS user. Follow the patterns that are the OS level patterns and the patterns that is happening in the rest of, if you're working on a small part of an application like a Facebook or something, the patterns of the rest of your application.
Totally.
Just make sure people know what to expect, that they're not just thrown off by your experience just going way off the radar. And if there's times to invent new patterns and do that, know when that time is and make sure you test it. Number 6, form interaction models based on emotional hypothesis. And this dives back into what I was talking about with the journey map. Pretty much like make your interactions like make sense from an emotional level. That's kind of the secret sauce to design for me, is to make sure that you are really playing to the emotions of people, not just like, having like, a very, dry, but good experience. Just make sure like there's something that builds a connection with the person. That's a great skill to have altogether in life, is just making sure you build an emotional connection with people and the interfaces that you use, because that ultimately will, create an addictive product. But yeah, there's so much I can talk about that, but I'll have to keep this short. Number 7, design the visuals. This is what everyone thinks about when they think of us as designers, pixel pushers and all of that. And push your pixels. And mind heuristics, semiotics and patterns, just pretty much make sure that as you're designing stuff, people will be able to figure out how, what each thing does, and there's, lots to say there, but,
right.
The design base. Number 8, create your prototype. I like to prototype very early and often. And just because sometimes, especially with mobile, it's hard to really get a good grasp of like, how something's going to feel unless you actually, have it in front of you in your hand. There's so many times where I just completely detour with a design just based on like it just feeling totally different once I actually play around it on the screen. Number 9, do user testing, then assemble the findings and rationale. Most companies these days have a researcher that you work with, but if they don't, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And that's really fun. I really enjoy it personally. There's so many different ways you could do it. You could go on usertesting.com, or, I like to do optimal sort for cart sorting, or you can just run your own tests. And, there's so much to this that I can't possibly try to explain the step, but, do user testing.
Yeah. It's a great way to learn about your customer or your user.
Yeah, exactly. Number 10, present strategy and negotiate the implementation plan. Present to everybody, often, people who are relevant, people who you may not see as relevant, just, so that you can as a further means of validating. And negotiate your implementation plan is really huge for, working with engineers and PMs, who have different opinions from time to time, or different, even if they agree with you, they're like, oh, but we don't have time for this, It requires a lot of negotiation. So if you have all your rationale and the reason for every single part of your design all played out in the presentation, that can help you if you really feel strongly about getting something pushed for a release. Number 11, implement specs with devs. Make sure you perfect. And once you get to the stage of, pushing things into production, perfect all of your visuals. Export everything. Sketch pretty much has tools for all this, to do it very easily. There's so many plugins I use for doing red lines and just just sometimes even, these little HTML exports that kind of help developers along. Depends on the developer that you're working with. But export and review with your developers. Make sure that they have a clear mindset of what they need to do, when you're giving them the specs, and work with them, review what they're working with. It's always good to have an extra stage in there where you're having them, having a review session with them to make sure that they're implementing exactly what you have in mind. Because, obviously, oftentimes engineers, don't really have that, visual mind state and whatnot. And so they'll miss things that are really important to you, or might defeat the purpose of what you've designed, to make sure that you, are, working with them very, charismatically and whatnot, and and trying to get things done as efficiently as possible.
Yeah.
And number 12, do your surveys, mind your analytics, post your return on investment, which is something I very rarely actually see done these days, which is a shame, because the return on investment pretty much validates everything that you've done. Like, this is the thing that you're mostly presenting to like your VPs and your executives, your managers. Like, okay, this is what this design has done. This is what it has achieved. This is, this will also help for your performance reviews. Like, okay, this design has turned up our usage by this amount, which is translated to this amount of dollars. If you want to go that far into it, depending on what the motivations of your management are. And make sure you just know what the results of your interface are. Don't just like throw something out there and not know what's going on with it, and this will help you too in constantly building and improving it. Know the return on investment, know what's happening to your baby that you put out to the world, so that you can keep on improving upon it, and also sell, your value to the rest of the team as you go on.
Yeah.
And most importantly, the last part of that step, keep on improving that UI. If you're still on a project, keep on improving that UI, and making it better and better. Don't just like put something out and like, it's done over and over with, because there's so many, factors in the human mind. The human brain is so complicated that, even if you're the best designer in the world, you'll sometimes run into issues where things just don't translate very well to the mass populations that you're, targeting your app to. So make sure you're always keeping, fresh of what's going on, what people are saying about your experience, so that you can keep on improving and making it better and better and better. So that's my process.
Awesome, man. Yeah. And just to add to that, design is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yeah.
So that does it for today's episode. Next week, I'll do my freestyle version and share something that I'm passionate about or interested in communicating to the community as well.
Can't wait to hear it.
So if you want to learn more about John's process, if you want to reach out to him or to myself, please visit angelocamachogroup.com, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.